Okay, everyone. We will now look at chapter 13. Yes, I have to mention the past lots of blogs. We were doing Emperor of All Maladies, and we've almost finished Emperor of All Maladies. And it's been a while since I've done a blog. I was thinking, what if I want to do something new? Where should I go? But I feel it would be better to tie up old things with a nice bow before moving on to any new stuff. So, my first goal is to complete Quantum. Then we're gonna go on and complete Emperor of All Maladies. And then we're going to go on and do something new. I'm thinking of reading a whole textbook or whatever. I'm kidding, it's a bit much, but Now, going back to where we last left off, this is chapter 13, Quantum Reality. Princeton is a madhouse, and Einstein is completely cuckoo, wrote Robert Oppenheimer. It was January 1935, and America's leading homegrown theoretical physicist was 31. 12 years later, after directing the building of the atomic bomb, he would return to the Institute for Advanced Study to take charge of the madhouse and its solipsistic luminaries shining in separate and helpless desolation. Einstein accepted that his critical attitude towards quantum mechanics ensured that here in Princeton I am considered an old fool. It was a sentiment widely shared by the younger generation of physicists who, having been weaned on the theory, agreed with Paul Dirac's assessment that quantum mechanics explained most of physics and all of chemistry. That a few old men were fighting about the meaning of the theory was, for them, neither here nor there, given its enormous practical success. By the end of the 1920s, as one problem after another in atomic physics was solved, attention shifted away from the atom to the nucleus. During the early 1930s, the discovery of the neutron by James Chadwick in Cambridge and the work of Enrico Fermi and his team in Rome on the reactions induced by the impact of neutrons on nuclei opened up the new frontier of nuclear physics. In 1932, John Cockcroft and Ernest Walton, Chadwick's colleagues in Rutherford's Cavendish laboratory, constructed the first particle accelerator and used it to split an atom up by breaking apart its nucleus. Einstein might have moved from Berlin to Princeton, but physics was moving on without him. He knew as much, but felt he had earned the right to pursue the physics that interested him. When he arrived at the Institute in October 1933, Einstein was shown to his new office and asked what equipment he needed. A desk or table, a chair, paper, and pencils, he replied. Oh yes, and a large wastebasket so I can throw away all my mistakes. And there were plenty, but Einstein was never disheartened as he sought his holy grail, a unified field theory. Just as Maxwell had unified electricity, magnetism, and light, into a single all-encompassing theoretical structure in the 19th century, Einstein hoped to unify electromagnetism and general relativity. For him, such a unification was the next step, as logical as it was inevitable. It was in 1925 that he undertook the first of his many attempts at constructing such a theory that ended up in the wastebasket. After the discovery of quantum mechanics, Einstein believed that a unified field theory would yield this new physics as a byproduct. In the years following Solvay 1930, there was little direct contact between Bohr and Einstein. A valuable channel of communication ceased with Paul Ehrenfest's suicide in September 1933. In a moving tribute, Einstein wrote of his friend's inner struggle to understand quantum mechanics and the increasing difficulty of adaptation to new thoughts which always confronts the man past 50. I do not know how many readers of these lines will be capable of fully grasping that tragedy. There were many who read Einstein's words and mistook them as a lament at his own plight. Now in his mid-50s, he knew he was regarded as a relic from a bygone age, refusing or unable to live with quantum mechanics. But he also knew that what separated him and Schrödinger from the most of their colleagues was that almost all the other fellows do not look from the facts to the theory, but from the theory to the facts. They cannot extricate themselves from a once accepted conceptual net, but only flop about it in such a grotesque way. But in spite of these mutual misgivings, there was always young physicists eager to work with Einstein. One was Nathan Rosen, a 25-year-old New Yorker who arrived from MIT in 1934 to serve as his assistant. A few months before Rosen, the 39-year-old Russian-born Boris Podolsky had joined the institute. He had first met Einstein at Caltech in 1931, and they had collaborated on a paper. Einstein had an idea for another paper. It would mark a new phase in his debate with Bohr, as it unleashed a fresh assault on the Copenhagen interpretation. At Solvay 1927 and 1930, Einstein attempted to circumvent the uncertainty principle to show that quantum mechanics was inconsistent and therefore incomplete. Bohr, aided by Heisenberg and Pauli, had successfully dismantled each thought experiment and defended the Copenhagen interpretation. Afterwards, Einstein accepted that although quantum mechanics was logically consistent, it was not the definitive theory that Bohr claimed. Einstein knew that he needed a new strategy to demonstrate that quantum mechanics is incomplete, that it does not fully capture physical reality. To this end, he developed his most enduring thought experiment. For several weeks, early in 1935, Einstein met Podolsky and Rosen in his office to thrash out his idea. Einstein met Podolsky and Rosen in his Podolsky was assigned the task of writing the resultant paper, while Rosen did most of the necessary mathematical calculations. Einstein, as Rosen recalled later, contributed the general point of view and its implications. Only 4 pages long, the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paper, or the EPR paper as it became known, was completed and mailed by the end of March. Can quantum mechanical description of physical reality be considered complete? With its missing "the" was published on 15th May in the American Journal Physical Review. The EPR answer to the question posed was a defiant no. Even before it appeared in print, Einstein's name ensured that the EPR paper generated the kind of publicity nobody wanted. On Saturday, the 4th of May 1935, the New York Times carried an article on page 11 under the attention-grabbing headline, "Einstein Attacks Quantum Theory." Professor Einstein will attack science's most important theory of quantum mechanics, a theory of which he was a sort of grandfather. He concluded that while it is correct, it is not complete. 3 days later, the New York Times carried a statement from a clearly disgruntled Einstein. Although no stranger to talking to the press, he pointed out that it is my invariable practice to discuss scientific matters only in the appropriate forum, and I deprecate advanced publication of any announcement in regard to such matters in the secular press. In the published paper, Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen started by differentiating between reality as it is and the physicist's understanding of it. Any serious consideration of a physical theory must take into account this distinction between the objective reality, which is independent of any theory, and the physical concepts with which the theory operates. These concepts are intended to correspond with the objective reality, and by means of these concepts we picture this reality to ourselves. Engaging the success of any particular physical theory, EPR argued that the 2 questions had to be answered with an unequivocal yes. Is the theory correct, and is the description given by the theory complete? The correctness of the theory is judged by the degree of agreement between the conclusions of the theory and human experience, said EPR. It was a statement that every physicist would accept when experience in physics takes the form of experiment and measurement. To date, there had been no conflict between the experiments performed in the laboratory and the theoretical predictions of quantum mechanics. It appeared to be a correct theory. Yet for Einstein, it was not enough for a theory to be correct, in agreement with the experiments. It also had to be complete. Whatever the meaning of the term complete, EPR imposed a necessary condition for the completeness of a physical theory. Every element of the physical reality must have a counterpart in the physical theory. This completeness criterion required EPR to define a so-called element of reality if they were to carry through their argument. Einstein did not want to get stuck in the philosophical quicksand, which had swallowed so many, of trying to define reality. In the past, none had emerged unscathed from an attempt to pinpoint what constituted reality. Astutely avoiding a comprehensive definition of reality as unnecessary for their purpose, EPR adopted what they deemed to be a sufficient and reasonable criterion for designating an element of reality. If, without in any way disturbing a system, we can predict with certainty, i.e. with probability equal to unity, the value of a physical quantity, then there exists an element of physical reality corresponding to this physical quantity. Einstein wanted to disprove Bohr's claim that quantum mechanics was a complete fundamental theory of nature by demonstrating that there existed objective elements of reality which the theory did not capture. Einstein had shifted the focus of the debate with Bohr and his supporters away from the internal consistency of quantum mechanics to the nature of reality and the role of theory. EPR asserted that for a theory to be complete, there had to be one-to-one correspondence between an element of the theory and an element of reality. A sufficient condition for the reality of a physical quantity, such as momentum, is the possibility of predicting it with certainty without disturbing the system. If there existed an element of physical reality that was unaccounted for by the theory, then the theory was incomplete. The situation would be akin to a person finding a book in a library, and when trying to check it out was being told by the librarian that according to the catalog there was no record of the library having the book, with the book bearing all the necessary markings indicating that it was indeed part of the collection. The only possible explanation would be that the library's catalog was incomplete. According to the uncertainty principle, a measurement that yields an exact value for the momentum of a microphysical object or a system excludes even the possibility of simultaneously measuring its position. The question that Einstein wanted to answer was, does this inability to measure its exact position directly mean that the electron does not have a definitive position? The Copenhagen interpretation answered that in the absence of a measurement to determine its position, the electron has no position. EPR set out to demonstrate that there are elements of physical reality, such as an electron having a definite position, that quantum mechanics cannot accommodate, and therefore it is incomplete. EPR attempted to clinch their argument with a thought experiment. Two particles, A and B, interact briefly and then move off in opposite directions. The uncertainty principle forbids the exact measurements, at any given instant, of both the position and the momentum of either particle. However, it does allow an exact and simultaneous measurement of the total momentum of the two particles, A and B, and the relative distance between them. The key to the EPR thought experiment is to leave particle B undisturbed by avoiding any direct observation of it. Even if A and B are light years apart, nothing within the mathematical structure of quantum mechanics prohibits a measurement of the momentum of A, yielding information about the exact momentum of B without B being disturbed in the process. When the momentum of particle A is measured exactly, it indirectly but simultaneously allows, via the law of conservation of momentum, an exact determination of the momentum of B. Therefore, according to the EPR criterion of reality, the momentum of B must be an element of physical reality. Similarly, by measuring the exact position of A, it is possible, because the physical distance separating A and B is known, to deduce the position of B without directly measuring it. Here, EPR argued, it too must be an element of physical reality. EPR appeared to have contrived the means to establish with certainty the exact values of either the momentum or the position of B due to measurements performed on particle A, without the slightest possibility of particle B being physically disturbed. Given their reality criterion, EPR argued that they had thus proved that both the momentum and position of particle B are elements of reality, that B can have simultaneously exact values of position and momentum. Since quantum mechanics via the uncertainty principle rules out any possibility of a particle simultaneously possessing both these properties, These elements of reality have no counterparts in the theory. Therefore, the quantum mechanical description of physical reality, EPR conclude, is incomplete. Einstein's thought experiment was not designed to simultaneously measure the position and momentum of particle B. He accepted that it was impossible to measure either of these particles of a particle, or either of these properties of a particle directly without causing an irreducible physical disturbance. Instead, the two-particle thought experiment was constructed to show that both properties could have a definite simultaneous existence, that both the position and the momentum of a particle are elements of reality. If these properties of particle B can be determined without B being observed or measured, then these properties of B must exist as elements of physical reality independently of being observed. Particle B has a position that is real and a momentum that is real. EPR were aware of the possible counter-argument that two or more physical quantities can be regarded as simultaneous elements of reality only when they can be simultaneously measured or predicted. This, however, made the reality of the momentum and position of particle B dependent upon the process of measurement carried out on particle A, which could be light years away and which does not disturb particle B in any way. No reasonable definition of reality could be expected to permit this, said the EPR. Central to the EPR's argument was Einstein's assumption of locality, that some mysterious instantaneous action at a distance does not exist. Locality ruled out the possibility of an event in a certain region of space instantaneously, faster than light, influencing another event elsewhere. For Einstein, the speed of light was nature's unbreakable limit on how fast anything could travel from one place to another. For the discoverer of relativity, it was inconceivable for a measurement on particle A to affect instantaneously, at a distance, the independent elements of physical reality possessed by particle B. As soon as the EPR paper appeared, the alarm was raised among the leading quantum pioneers throughout Europe. Einstein has once again made a public statement about quantum mechanics, and even in the issue of Physical Review of May 15th, together with Podolsky and Rosen, not good company by the way, wrote a furious Pauli in Zurich to Heisenberg in Leipzig. As is well known, he continued, that is a disaster whenever it happens. Pauli nevertheless conceded, as only he could, that if a student in one of his earlier semesters had raised such objections, I would have considered him quite intelligent and promising. With the zeal of a quantum missionary, Pauli urged Heisenberg to publish an immediate rebuttal to prevent any confusion or wavering among fellow physicists in the wake of Einstein's latest challenge. Pauli admitted that he had considered, for educational reasons, squandering paper and ink in order to formulate these facts demanded by quantum theory, which caused Einstein particular intellectual difficulties. In the end, it was Heisenberg who drafted a reply to the EPR paper and sent Pauli a copy. But Heisenberg withheld the publication of his paper, as Bohr had already taken up arms in defense of the Copenhagen interpretation. I feel like I'm speeding through this, but I still have like fucking 13 pages to go, 18 pages to go, holy moly. The EPR onslaught came down on us like a bolt from the blue, recalled Leon Rosenfeld, who was in Copenhagen at the time. Its effect on Bohr was remarkable. Immediately abandoning everything else, Bohr was convinced that a thorough examination of the EPR thought experiment would reveal where Einstein had gone wrong. He would show them the right way to speak about it. Excitedly, Bohr started dictating to Rosenfeld a draft of a reply, but soon he began to hesitate. No, this won't do. We must try all over again, Bohr mumbled to himself. So it went on for a while, with growing wonder at the unexpected subtlety of the EPR argument, recalled Rosenfeld. Now and then he would turn to me and ask, "What can they mean? Do you understand it?" After a while, an increasingly agitated Bohr realized that the argument Einstein had deployed was both ingenious and subtle. A refutation of the EPR paper would be harder than he first thought, and he announced that he must sleep on it. The next day he was calmer. They do it smartly, he told Rosenfeld, but what counts is to do it right. For the next 6 weeks, day and night, Bohr worked on nothing else. Even before he had finished his reply to EPR, Bohr wrote a letter on June 29th for publication in the journal Nature. Entitled Quantum Mechanics and Physical Reality, it briefly spelled out his counterattack. Once again, the New York Times smelt a story. Bohr and Einstein at odds. They began a controversy concerning the fundamental nature of reality, were the headlines of the article that appeared on 28th of July. The Einstein-Bohr controversy had just begun this week in the current issue of Nature, the British scientific publication, the paper told its readers, with a preliminary challenge by Professor Bohr to Professor Einstein, and with a promise by Professor Bohr that a fuller development of this argument would be given in an article to be published shortly in the Physical Review. Bohr had deliberately chosen the same forum as Einstein, and his 6-page response, received on 13th of July, was also entitled, Can Quantum Mechanical Description of Physical Reality be Considered Complete? Published on the 15th of October, Bohr's answer was an emphatic yes. However, unable to identify any error in the EPR argument, Bohr was reduced to arguing that Einstein's evidence for quantum mechanics being incomplete was not strong enough to bear the weight of such a claim. Using a debating tactic with a long and illustrious history, Bohr began his defense of the Copenhagen interpretation by simply rejecting the major component of Einstein's case for incompleteness, the criterion for physical reality. Bohr believed that he had identified a weakness in the EPR definition, the need to conduct a measurement without in any way disturbing a system. Bohr hoped to exploit what he described as an essential ambiguity when it is applied to quantum phenomena of the reality criterion, as he publicly retreated from the position that an act of measurement resulted in an unavoidable physical disturbance. He had relied on disturbance to undermine Einstein's previous thought experiments by demonstrating that it was impossible to know simultaneously the exact momentum and position of a particle because the act of measuring one caused an uncontrollable disturbance that ruled out an exact measurement of the other. Bohr knew perfectly well that EPR did not seek to challenge Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, since their thought experiment was not designed to simultaneously measure the position and momentum of a particle. Bohr acknowledged that as much when he wrote that in the EPR thought experiment, that there is no question of a mechanical disturbance of the system under investigation. It was a significant public concession, one he had made in private a few years earlier, as he, Heisenberg, Hendrik Kramers, and Oscar Klein sat around the fire in his country cottage in Tidsvelde. Isn't it odd, said Klein, that Einstein should have such great difficulty in accepting the role of chance in atomic physics? It is because we cannot make observations without disturbing the phenomena, said Heisenberg. The quantum effects we introduce with our observation automatically introduce a degree of uncertainty into the phenomenon to be observed. This Einstein refuses to accept, although he knows the facts perfectly well. I don't entirely agree with you, Bohr told Heisenberg. In any case, he continued, I find all such assertions as observation introduces uncertainty into the phenomenon inaccurate and misleading. Nature has taught us that the word phenomenon cannot be applied to atomic processes unless we also specify what experimental arrangement or what observational instruments are involved. If a particular experimental setup has been defined and a particular observation follows, then we can admittedly speak of a phenomenon, but not of its disturbance by observation. Yet before, during, and after the Solvay conferences, an act of measurement disturbing the observed object peppered Bohr's writings and was central to his dismantling of Einstein's thought experiments. Feeling the pressure from Einstein's continual probing of the Copenhagen interpretation, Bohr abandoned his previous reliance on disturbance because he knew that it implied that an electron, for example, existed in a state that could be disturbed. Instead, Bohr now emphasized that any microphysical object being measured and the apparatus doing the measuring formed an indivisible whole, the phenomenon. There was simply no room for a physical disturbance due to an act of measurement. This was why Bohr believed that the EPR reality criterion was ambiguous. Alas, Bohr's response to EPR was less than clear. Years later, in 1949, he admitted to a certain inefficiency of expression when he reread his paper. Bohr tried to clarify that the essential ambiguity he had alluded to in his EPR rejoinder lay in referring to physical attributes of objects when dealing with phenomena, where no sharp distinction can be made between the behavior of the objects themselves and the interaction with the measuring instruments. Oh, God. Bohr did not object to EPR predicting the results of possible measurements of particle B based on knowledge acquired by measuring particle A. Once the momentum of particle A is measured, it is possible to predict accurately the result of a similar measurement of the momentum of particle B as outlined by EPR. However, Bohr argued that that does not mean the momentum is an independent element of B's reality. Only when an actual momentum measurement is carried out on B can it be said to possess momentum. A particle's momentum becomes real only when it interacts with a device designed to measure its momentum. A particle does not exist in some unknown but real state prior to an active measurement. Okay. In the absence of such a measurement to determine either position or the momentum of a particle, Bohr argued that it was meaningless to assert that it actually possessed either. For Bohr, the role of the measuring apparatus was pivotal in defining EPR's elements of reality. Thus, once a physicist sets up the equipment to measure the exact position of particle A, from which the position of particle B can be calculated with certainty, it excludes the possibility of measuring the momentum of A and hence deducing the momentum of B. If, as Bohr conceded to EPR, there is no direct physical disturbance of particle B, then its elements of physical reality, he argued, must be defined by the nature of the measuring device in the measurement made on A. For EPR, if the momentum of B is an element of reality, then the momentum measurement of particle A cannot affect B. It merely allows the calculation of the momentum that particle B has independently of any measurement. EPR's reality criterion assumes that if particles A and B exert no physical force on each other, then whatever happens to one cannot disturb the other. However, according to Bohr, since A and B had once interacted before traveling apart, they were forever entwined as part of a single system and could not be treated individually as two separate particles. Hence, subjecting A to a momentum measurement was practically the same as performing a direct measurement on B, leading instantly to it having a well-defined momentum. Bohr agreed that there was no mechanical disturbance of particle B due to an observation of particle A. Like EPR, he too excluded the possibility of any physical force, a push or pull, acting on a distance. However, if the reality of the position or momentum of particle B is determined by measurements performed on particle A, then there appears to be some instantaneous influence at a distance. This violates locality, that what happens to A cannot instantaneously affect B, and separability, that A and B exist independently of each other. Both concepts lay at the heart of the EPR argument and Einstein's view of an observer-independent reality. However, Bohr maintained that the measurement of particle A somehow instantaneously influences particle B. He did not expand on the nature of this mysterious influence on the very conditions which define the possible types of predictions regarding the further behavior of the system. Bohr concluded that since these conditions constitute an inherent element of the description of any phenomenon to which the term physical reality can be properly attached, we see that the argumentation of the mentioned authors does not justify their conclusion that quantum mechanical description is essentially incomplete. I hate this chapter. What the fuck? Einstein mocked Bohr's voodoo forces and spooky interactions. It seems hard to look into the cards of the Almighty, he wrote later, but I won't for 1 minute believe that he throws dice or uses telepathic devices, as he is being credited with by the present quantum theory. He told Bohr that physics should represent reality in time and space, free from spooky action at a distance. The EPR paper expressed Einstein's view that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum theory and the existence of an objective reality were incompatible. He was right, and Bohr knew it. There is no quantum world. There is only an abstract quantum mechanical description, argued Bohr. According to the Copenhagen interpretation, particles do not have an independent reality. They do not possess properties when they are not being observed. It It was a view that was later concisely summarized by the American physicist John Archibald Wheeler. No elementary phenomenon is a real phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon. A year before EPR, Pascual Jordan took the Copenhagen rejection of an observer-independent reality to its logical conclusion. We ourselves produce the results of measurement. Now we have the star all over again, said Paul Dirac, because Einstein proved that it does not work. He initially believed that Einstein had delivered a fatal blow against quantum mechanics, but soon, like most physicists, Dirac accepted that Bohr had once more emerged victorious from a battle with Einstein. Quantum mechanics had long proved its worth, and few were interested in examining Bohr's reply to the EPR argument too closely, for it was obscure even by his own standards. Shortly after the EPR paper appeared in print, Einstein received a letter from Schrödinger. I was very happy that the paper just published in PR. I was very happy that in the paper just published in PR, you have evidently caught dogmatic QM by the coattails. After offering an analysis of some of the finer points of the EPR paper, Schrödinger explained his own reservation concerning the theory he had done so much to create. My interpretation is that we do not have a QM that is consistent with relativity theory, i.e., with a finite transmission speed of all influences. We have only the analogy of the old absolute mechanics. The separation process is not at all encompassed by the orthodox scheme. What the fuck does that mean? What the fuck? Okay. As Bohr's role of separability and locality in the EPR argument meant that quantum mechanics was As Bohr struggled to formulate his response, Schrödinger believed that the central role of separability and locality in the EPR argument meant that quantum mechanics was not a complete description of reality. In his letter, Schrödinger used the term Verschränkung, later translated into English as entanglement, to describe the correlations between two particles that interact and then separate, as in the EPR experiment. He accepted, like Bohr, that having interacted, instead of two one-particle systems, there was just a single two-particle system, and therefore any changes to one particle would affect the other, despite the distance that separated them. Any entanglement of predictions that takes place can obviously only go back to the fact that the two bodies at some earlier time formed in a true sense one system, that is, were interacting, and has left behind traces on each other, he wrote in a famous paper published later in the year. If two separated bodies, each by itself known maximally, enter a situation in which they influence each other and separate again, then there occurs regularity, that which I have called entanglement of our knowledge of the two bodies. Although he did not share Einstein's intellectual and emotional commitment to locality, Schrödinger was not prepared to reject it. He put forward an argument for undoing the entanglement. Any measurement on either separated part A and B of an entangled two-particle state breaks the entanglement, and both are once more independent of each other. Measurements on separated systems, he concluded, cannot directly influence each other. That would be magic. Schrödinger must have been surprised when he read the letter, dated 17th of June, that arrived from Einstein. From the point of view of principles, he wrote, I absolutely do not believe in a statistical basis for physics in the sense of quantum mechanics, despite the singular success of the formalism of which I am well aware. This Schrödinger already knew, but Einstein declared, this epistemology-soaked orgy ought to come to an end. I was so preoccupied in epistemology that I was just sidelined by orgy. What the fuck? Even as he wrote the words, Einstein knew how he sounded. No doubt, however, you smile at me and think that, after all, many a young heretic turns into an old fanatic, and many a young revolutionary becomes an old reactionary. Their letters had crossed in the post. 2 days after having written his, Einstein received Schrödinger's letter on the EPR paper and replied immediately. What I really intended has not come across very well, Einstein explained. On the contrary, the main point was, so to speak, buried by erudition. The EPR paper written by Podolsky lacked the clarity and style that characterized Einstein's published work in German. He was unhappy that the fundamental rule of separability, that the state of one object cannot depend upon the kind of measurement made on another spatially separated object, has been obscured in the paper. Einstein wanted the separation principle to be an explicit feature of the EPR argument and not, as it appeared on the last page, as some sort of afterthought. He wanted to draw out the incompatibility of separability and the completeness of quantum mechanics. Both could not be true. The actual difficulty lies in the fact that physics is a kind of metaphysics, he told Schrödinger. Physics describes reality. We know it only through its physical description. Physics was nothing less than a description of reality, but that description, Einstein wrote, can't be complete or incomplete. He attempted to illustrate what he meant by asking Schrödinger to imagine two closed boxes, one of which contains a ball. Opening the lid of a box and looking inside is making an observation. Prior to looking inside the first box, the probability that it contains the ball is 1/2. In other words, there is a 50% chance that the ball is inside the box. After the ball is opened, there is either a probability of 1, the ball is in the box, or 0, the ball is not in the box. But, as Einstein says, in reality, the ball was always in one of the two boxes. So he asks, is the statement, the probability is 1/2 that the ball is in the first box, a complete description of reality? If no, then a complete description would be the ball is or is not in the first box. If before the box is open is deemed to be a complete description, then such a description would be the ball is not in one of two boxes. The ball's existence in a definite box occurs only when one of the boxes is opened. In this way arises the statistical character of the world of experience, or its empirical system of laws, concluded Einstein. So he poses the question, is the state before the box is opened completely described by the probability 1/2? To decide, Einstein brought in the separation principle. The second box and its content is independent of anything that happens to the first box. Therefore, according to him, the answer is no. Assigning the probability of 1/2 that the first box contains the ball is an incomplete description of reality. It was Bohr's violation of Einstein's separation principle that resulted in the spooky action at a distance in the EPR thought experiment. On 8th August 1935, Einstein followed up his ball in the box with a more explosive scenario to demonstrate to Schrödinger the incompleteness of quantum mechanics, because the theory could only offer probabilities when there was certainty. He asked Schrödinger to consider a keg of unstable gunpowder that spontaneously combusts at some time during the next year. At the beginning, the wave function describes a well-defined state, a keg of unexploded gunpowder. But after a year, the wave function describes a sort of blend of not yet and of already exploded systems. Through no art of interpretation can this wave function be turned into an adequate description of a real state of affairs, Einstein told Schrödinger, for in reality, there is no intermediary between exploded and not exploded. Either the keg had exploded or had not. It was, said Einstein, a crude macroscopic example that exhibited the same difficulties as encountered in the EPR thought experiment. The flurry of letters he exchanged with Einstein between June and August 1935 had inspired Schrödinger to scrutinize the Copenhagen interpretation. The fruit of this dialogue was a 3-part essay published between 29 November and 13 December. Schrödinger said he did not know whether to call the present system in quantum mechanics a report or a general confession. Either way, it contained a single paragraph about the fate of a cat that was to have a lasting impact. A cat is penned up in a steel chamber, along with the following diabolical device, which must be secured against direct interference by the cat. In a Geiger counter, there is a tiny bit of radioactive substance so small that perhaps in the course of 1 hour one of the atoms decays, but also with equal probability perhaps none. If it happens, the counter tube discharges, and through a relay releases a hammer which shatters a small flask of hydrocyanic acid. If one has left this entire system to itself for an hour, one would say that a cat still lives if, meanwhile, no atom has decayed. The first atomic decay would have poisoned it. The wave function of the entire system would express this by having in it the living and the dead cat, pardon the expression, mixed or smeared out in equal parts. According to Schrödinger and common sense, the cat is either dead or alive, depending on whether or not there has been a radioactive decay. But according to Bohr and his followers, the realm of the subatomic is an Alice in Wonderland sort of place. Because only an active observation can decide if there has been a decay or not, it is only this observation which determines whether the cat is dead or alive. Until then, that cat is consigned to quantum purgatory, a superposition of states in which it is neither dead nor alive. Although he chided Schrödinger for choosing to publish it in a German journal, while there remained German scientists prepared to tolerate the Nazi regime, Einstein was delighted. The cat shows, he told Schrödinger, that we agree completely with respect to the character of the present theory. A wave function that contains a living and a dead cat cannot be considered to describe a real state. Years later, in 1950, Einstein inadvertently blew up the cat, as he forgot it was he who devised the exploding gunpowder keg. Writing to Schrödinger about contemporary physics, he could not conceal his dismay at their insistence that the quantum theory provides a description of reality, and even a complete description. Such an interpretation, Einstein told Schrödinger, was refuted most elegantly by your system of radioactive atom plus Geiger counter plus amplifier plus charge of gunpowder plus cat in a box, in which the wave function of the system contains the cat both alive and blown to bits. Interesting. Schrödinger's famous feline thought experiment also highlighted the difficulty of where to draw the line between the measuring apparatus, which is part of the macro world of the everyday, and the object being measured, which is part of the micro world of the quantum. For Bohr, there was no sharp cut between the classical and quantum worlds. To explain his point about the unbreakable bond between observer and observed, Bohr offered the example of a blind man with a cane. Where, he asked, was the break between the blind man and the unseen world in which he lived. The blind man is inseparable from his cane, argued Bohr. It is an extension of him, as he uses it to get information about the world around him. Does the world start at the tip of the blind man's cane? No, said Bohr. Through the tip of the cane, the blind man's sense of touch reaches into the world, and the two are inextricably bound together. Bohr suggested that the same applies when an experimenter attempts to measure some property of a microphysical particle. The observer and the observed are entwined in an intimate embrace through the act of measurement, such that it is impossible to say where one begins and the other ends. What the fuck, man? Nevertheless, the Copenhagen view assigns a privileged position to the observer, be it human or a mechanical device, in the construction of reality. But all matter is made up of atoms and therefore subject to the laws of quantum mechanics. So how can the observer or measuring apparatus have a privileged position? This is the measurement problem. The Copenhagen interpretation's assumption of the prior existence of the classical world of the macroscopic measuring device appears circular and paradoxical. Einstein and Schrödinger believed it to be a glaring indication of the incompleteness of quantum mechanics as a total worldview, and Schrödinger tried to highlight it with his cat in a box. Measurement in the Copenhagen interpretation remains an unexplained process, since there is nothing in the mathematics of quantum mechanics that specifies how or when the wave function collapses. Bohr solved the problem by simply declaring that measurements can indeed be made, but never offered an explanation of how. Schrödinger met Bohr while in England in March 1936 and reported the encounter to Einstein. Recently in London, I spent a few hours with Niels Bohr, who in his kind, courteous way repeatedly said that he found it appalling, even found it high treason that people like Lau and I, but in particular someone like you, should want to strike a blow against quantum mechanics with the well-known paradoxical situation, which is so necessarily contained in the way of things, so supported by experiment. It is as if we are trying to force nature to accept our preconceived conception of reality. He speaks with the deep inner conviction of an extraordinarily intelligent man, so that it is difficult for one to remain unmoved in one's position. Yet Schrödinger and Einstein both remain steadfast in their opposition to the Copenhagen interpretation. I'm done. This is not the end of the chapter. There's like 9 more pages left, but I'm done. My throat is fucked up. And I think I gotta eat dinner or whatnot. I'll leave it here. We're on page 318. I was storming through that. There was like what is that, 15 whole pages. I was storming through that. Okay.